Hello lovely people. March is just around the corner, which means it is time for me to do my Dewithon TBR.
Sophie vlogs.
So Dewithon is a readathon that happens every March that is all about reading Welsh books. I'm going to leave a link below to the person who started this. I think it's much more of a thing in like the blogging world than necessarily the YouTube world, but there are people here who always take part. So particularly Heather and Sian are the two that I always look forward to seeing their videos on, so I'll link both of them down below so that you can have a look at them too if you're interested in taking part, having some reading inspiration, all of those lovely things. The idea of Dewithon is it's named after Dewi Sant, which is St David's, patron saint of Wales, and St David's Day is the 1st of March, which is why this always happens in March. The idea is that for the whole month you just read some Welsh books. These can be written in Welsh or English, they can be by Welsh writers, they can be by writers who might not be Welsh but who have lived in Wales, who have been influenced by Wales, or they can take place in Wales or be inspired by Welsh things, all of these things. Essentially, it's just a time to have fun. I love reading Welsh literature. My actual Welsh ability is limited. I have worn my 80s style Welsh love spoon earrings, especially for this video. I have been building my TBR since last year's Dewithon ended. I'm just going to dive in and tell you what I will be reading. So I will be doing a bit of a mix of fiction and non-fiction. So the first book I'm hoping to read is a non-fiction. This is The Story of Wales by John Gower, with an introduction by Hugh Edwards. This was one of the potential books that I was going to read last year, but instead I read John Davies' book, Wales, which was a extremely thorough from like prehistory to I think the last time it was updated was like the 80s or 90s, and that was exceedingly interesting. But by the time I had finished that book, I didn't feel like I needed to do another book that was looking at Wales, so I've been saving this one for this year. So the sections that it is split into are before Wales, which is like prehistory, invasion and assimilation, which is like Saxons, Britons, that kind of thing, Vikings, colonisation and rebellion, industrial Wales, the making of modern Wales. So this is another one that potentially might cover some ground in the stuff that I read last year, but I think you never remember everything you read from big chunky non-fictions, do you? So the more I repeat things, the more I will actively learn history. So I'm really excited to do this one. Next up is a fiction book. This is Early Riser by Jasper Fforde. Jasper Fforde is Welsh. I have noticed some Welsh influence in some of his books before. So he writes a lot of like fantasy, science fiction kind of things. They always have a lot of humour in. I've read some of his Thursday Next series, which is sort of like a literary detective, so like you can go into books and you can change what happens in books, which was great. The one that I'm thinking of is, I think Shades of Grey is the name, it's up there, I should remember it, but that was almost like a dystopian society that is based around how much you can perceive colour. People who can perceive colour more are higher in the society than those who can't. And it was one of those books that I think it took a while to develop, but like by the end I really, really liked it. But some of the words for places and stuff in there, like I could tell that it was set in what I would say is Wales, but in this world like that doesn't exist, you know? So that was interesting. This one is a science fiction. First of all, let's just look at this cover that opens up. Fabulous. Essentially, every winter humanity hibernates for 4 months. And this is focused on the people whose job it is to keep everything ticking over while they're hibernating, except for, as you might expect, things start going wrong. There's like some kind of disease that can pass through dreams and kill people. This is just one of those that I think that concept sounds really interesting, like a viral dream kind of thing. It sounds like there's going to be lots of other little factors at play. I hope that it's going to be told with Jasper Fforde's like usual like humour and mirth, because I really like that sort of element of his writing. Yeah, I've been meaning to read this one for a really long time, so I'm excited. I've been saving it since I bought it last year, as I have with most of these. Speaking of books that I have been saving, this is Black Maria by Diana Wynne Jones. I meant to read this for Dewithon 2020, and I had started reading it, and it was my book that was in my office, and then we went into lockdown, and I didn't go back to my office for months and months and months. So I finally have my little tiny paws on this again, and I'm really excited to actually get to it this time. Diana Wynne Jones is not Welsh, but she did live in Wales, and it definitely, like, the only other work of hers that I have read so far is Howl's Moving Castle, but you can definitely, like, Wales has a presence in that. This follows Mig, who is staying with her Aunt Maria, but although she seems like a nice old lady, actually she's like incredibly stern and not someone to cross. Things essentially develop to a point where Aunt Maria turns Mig's brother into a wolf, I think? Yes, into a wolf. And then there's a ghost and a green box, and Mig is catapulted into the oldest struggle our world has ever known. I think that this sounds really intriguing and mysterious. I'm really interested to try a Diana Wynne Jones that I do not have any knowledge of, because Howl's Moving Castle I went into kind of with an idea based on the Ghibli film, whereas this one I don't have any knowledge at all. It's really giving me vibes of like classic 60s like children's fantasy, like the Dark is Rising sequence, like stuff like that. Like those are the kind of vibes I'm getting from it. Finally gonna actually finish it. I think I only got like a chapter in last time anyway, so we're gonna actually do it this time. A writer that I have been exploring generally at the moment is Jan Morris. Jan Morris is an Anglo-Welsh writer. I have a bunch of her books because my partner has also been exploring her writing, and it's interesting because we came at her through different lenses. So I was familiar with her work Conundrum, which is her account of transitioning in, I believe, like the 50s. And it had a massive impact at the time that it was released. She was originally in the army, so she talks a lot about her experiences in the army in it, as well as like her experience transitioning, like how do you go about doing that in like that particular time when it's not something that there's a real specialism in, and that kind of thing. I found that really interesting. Definitely some of her language, like you might read it now and think that it's a bit outdated in some of her language that she's using, but at the same time, like this is this person's experience of their gender, and like language changes and the way that we understand things changes. So I didn't find that put me off at all, although I could understand that some people reading it might find that a bit off-putting. But I found that really interesting. So like I was familiar with her from that because I read a lot of queer non-fiction and it gets referenced a lot in those because it was very influential at the time. My partner's really familiar with her because of her writings about Wales and about Welsh independence and all that kind of thing. So he bought a bunch of her books and I've been working my way through them. I've already wrapped up her book about Hong Kong in my Nonfiction November roundup, so I'll put that down below in case you're interested in that. I have two options for this one. The first one is The Matter of Wales, Epic Views of a Small Country. This one, I understand, is quite dense, and it's really going into detail on, like, Wales and what should Wales's future be. And it also centres a lot around Owain Glyndwr's rebellion, which is a piece of history that I absolutely love and I'm always happy to read things about. The thing that is holding me back from choosing this one for Dewithon is because I am already going to be reading the story of Wales. I don't want to overdo it. So I might end up saving this one maybe for next year's Dewithon, and the one I might read this year is In My Mind's Eye, A Thought Diary. So this was written much later in Jan Morris's life. This one is definitely a lot lighter. It's just sort of like reflections. But my favourite Jan Morris that I have read so far was Trieste, The Meaning of Nowhere, where Jan Morris was looking at the city of Trieste, where she has spent much time across her life, both when she was in the army and then also just like revisiting it as a civilian. And it was a very reflective book. I felt like, because she's often referred to as like a travel writer, although that she would quibble with that, I think. But I think she's wonderful at building up a sense of place and really doing evocative descriptions. And I really enjoyed the reflective nature of Trieste. So I'm potentially thinking that a little thought diary, although it might be more fragmented than that was, if we're doing like thoughts and noodles and generally contemplating things, potentially this might work better with the other books that I have planned. So I think I'm going to go for this one, but we will see where the mood takes me. The final book I want to read is one that is on my radar either because of Heather or Sian. I can't actually remember who talked about this, but one of them talked about this last year for Dewithon, and I thought it sounded interesting, so I picked it up for this year's. This is Sugar and Slate by Charlotte Williams. This is sort of a look at like mixed race Welsh identity. So our young woman who is the main character of this is the daughter of a white Welsh-speaking mother and a black father from Guyana who grows up in a small town on the coast of North Wales. She travels to Africa, the Caribbean, and then she returns to Wales. So I say I'm giving this like a girl. This is a memoir. So this is Charlotte Williams' look, like her own like reflection on her life, like exploring ideas of like movement, dislocation, her status as a mixed race woman in Wales and also in these other places. I think it sounds really, really interesting. I love a good memoir, so definitely excited to dive into this one for sure. The only other two books that I wanted to briefly mention is that if that's not enough for me in March, I do have on my Kindle two Arthurian Retellings. Now, neither of these are written by Welsh authors, but the Arthurian myths do have roots in Wales and in like the Mabinogion and stuff like this. So on my Kindle, I do have The Child Queen by Nancy Tucker, which is the first book of, I think it's either a trilogy or a four-book series, which follows Guinevere. This is very like what I would associate with like traditional Arthurian fantasy, when it is like absolutely like a fantasy book that is set in like medieval period, and we're following the story from Guinevere's point of view. This one is on my radar because of Jade at Jade Juniper, because she really loves it. You can get it in a bind up where it's called like the Summer Queen, I think is what it's called, where it's the first two books bound up together, but on Kindle they're sold separately, so I just bought the first one, potentially see how it goes. And then the other one is another Guinevere one, which is The Guinevere Deception by Kierstan, which is that Guinevere is due to marry Arthur, but like her actual identity is secret and that kind of thing. That is one that I heard a lot of buzz around like a couple of years ago. That's everything I'm planning to read for Dewithon. I would really love to hear, are you taking part? Are you planning on reading anything in particular? Even if you're not planning on taking part, like, do you have a favourite Welsh writer, favourite Welsh book? I would really, really love to hear. I'm always after recommendations and things that I can use in next year's Dewithon. I mean, I also read Welsh books throughout the year. It's just sometimes when there are particular gems, I save them for the year ahead. So I would love to hear any of these thoughts or more from you in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you have a lovely day, a lovely March, and merry reading.